The briefing room fell silent when Commander Zara Phantom Camel raised her hand. Not the polite, fingers-together gesture of a student seeking permission to speak, but the precise, deliberate configuration that made General Morrison's coffee cup pause halfway to his lips. 3 fingers extended, thumb and pinky folded, a signal that shouldn't exist in this room, among these people in this moment. Only SEALs use that hand signal, Morrison said, his voice carrying the weight of 30 years in uniform and the certainty of a man who'd never been wrong about such things. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the assembled officers who shifted uncomfortably in their metal chairs. Outside, the Nevada desert stretched endlessly, punctuated only by the occasional roar of test aircraft breaking the sound barrier. Zara's response came not in words, but in the slow, methodical movement of her left hand to her collar. Her fingers found the small silver pin hidden beneath her flight suit's fabric, a trident barely visible, worn smooth by years of concealment. She held Morrison's gaze as she revealed it, watching his expression transform from condescension to confusion to something approaching recognition. The pin caught the light for exactly 3 seconds before she covered it again. In those 3 seconds, the room's atmosphere shifted like the pressure change before a storm. Major Collins, seated to her right, stopped breathing altogether. Captain Reeves, who'd been scribbling notes about the upcoming mission, set down his pen with the careful precision of a man defusing a bomb. Morrison's coffee cup completed its journey to the table with a sharp clink that echoed through the sudden quiet. His eyes, pale blue and typically unforgiving, now held questions he couldn't voice in front of the assembled personnel. Questions about classified operations, about histories that officially didn't exist, about a pilot who'd somehow ended up in his command with credentials that made no sense and a service record full of redacted sections. "The mission brief stands as presented," Morrison finally said, though his voice had lost its earlier certainty. "Commander Camel will lead the reconnaissance flight over Sector 7 at 0800. He paused, studying her face as if seeing it for the first time. "Dismissed." As the officers filed out, discussing flight patterns and equipment checks in hushed tones, Morrison remained seated. Zara gathered her charts and maps, moving with the unhurried efficiency of someone accustomed to being watched, evaluated, doubted. She'd worn that expression through flight school, through her early assignments, through countless briefings where she'd proven herself again and again to men who seemed determined to find her wanting. But this time felt different. This time the silence held weight. The morning sun painted the runway in shades of amber and gold as Zara performed her pre-flight inspection. Her F-35C Lightning II stood like a metallic predator against the dawn sky, its angular surfaces designed to slip through radar nets like a whisper through noise. She ran her hands along the aircraft's skin, checking for stress fractures, loose panels, anything that might compromise the mission ahead. Captain Reeves approached with her helmet and flight gear, his usual casual banter replaced by careful formality. "Weather's clear, ma'am. Winds at 15 knots from the southwest. Tower reports all systems green for your departure." "Copy that, Reeves." She accepted the helmet, noting how he avoided her eyes. Word traveled fast on military bases, and the briefing room incident had already begun its journey through the rumor mill. By evening, she knew, there would be a dozen versions of what had happened, each more elaborate than the last. The cockpit welcomed her like an old friend. Every switch, every display, every control surface exactly where muscle memory expected them to be. She'd flown hundreds of aircraft in her career, some officially, others in circumstances that remained classified years later. The F-35 systems hummed to life around her, screens flickering with data streams and targeting solutions. "Tower, this is Phantom requesting clearance for departure." "Phantom, you are cleared for takeoff. Winds 180 at 15, altimeter 2997. The engine spooled up with a sound like controlled thunder. Through her canopy, she could see Morrison standing at the tower's observation deck, his silhouette stark against the morning light. Even at this distance, she felt the weight of his scrutiny, the questions he couldn't ask, the answers he wouldn't receive. The aircraft lifted smoothly from the runway, and the base fell away beneath her. At 5,000 feet, she banked north toward Sector 7, toward a mission that seemed routine on paper but felt anything but routine in her gut. Intelligence reports suggested enemy activity in the region, drone flights, unusual radio traffic, the kind of signatures that demanded investigation. What the reports couldn't mention, was why they'd specifically requested her for this assignment. Why a pilot with her particular background, her specific skill set, her carefully guarded history? The answer lay somewhere in the desert ahead, hidden among the classified frequencies and coded transmissions that her aircraft's sensors would intercept. At 15,000 feet, Zara activated her aircraft's stealth configuration. The F-35 seemed to dissolve into the morning sky, its radar signature shrinking to something smaller than a bird. Below, the Nevada landscape spread out like a topographical map come to life, mountain ranges casting long shadows, dry lake beds reflecting the sun like mirrors, roads cutting straight lines through territory that existed primarily on military charts. Control, this is Phantom approaching Sector 7 boundaries, beginning reconnaissance sweep. Roger Phantom, be advised we're tracking intermittent radar contacts in your area. Proceed with caution. The warning came through her headset with the crisp professionalism of an air traffic controller who'd never seen combat, never felt the particular tension that came with flying alone into uncertain airspace. Zara adjusted her sensor array, scanning frequencies that most pilots weren't cleared to monitor. The first anomaly appeared as a faint blip on her electronic warfare display, a transmission spike lasting exactly 2.3 seconds, originating from coordinates that should have been empty desert. She marked the location and continued her sweep, noting how the landscape below seemed ordinary yet somehow wrong, like a photograph where someone had moved the furniture while you weren't looking. Her radio crackled with static, then cleared to reveal a voice speaking in rapid Arabic. The words meant nothing to most American pilots, but Zara's linguistic training kicked in automatically. Equipment status reports, personnel movements, and something else, coordinates that matched her current position with unsettling precision. Control, Phantom. I'm detecting organized activity at grid November 7-4 Alpha. Recommend immediate satellite verification. Phantom Control. Negative on satellite assets. Continue reconnaissance as briefed. The response came too quickly, with too much certainty. Zara's training had taught her to recognize the subtle tells of operational secrecy, when controllers knew more than they were saying, when missions had layers that weren't shared with the pilots flying them. She'd encountered this before in places that didn't officially exist, during operations that generated no paperwork. She banked east, following a dry riverbed that carved through the desert like an ancient scar. The morning sun climbed higher, turning the sky from amber to brilliant blue, but something in the quality of light felt different here, as if the air itself held secrets. Her radar warning receiver suddenly screamed to life. The tone that filled Zara's cockpit was unmistakable: target acquisition radar, military grade, painting her aircraft with electromagnetic energy designed to guide surface-to-air missiles. Her hands moved through the countermeasures sequence with practiced efficiency. Chaff deployment, electronic jamming activation, evasive maneuvers that stressed the F-35's airframe but kept her alive. Control, Phantom, I'm spiked. SAM site active at my position. Static answered her. The radio frequencies that should have connected her to base were filled with electronic noise, a jamming pattern sophisticated enough to suggest enemy capabilities beyond what intelligence had predicted. She was alone in hostile airspace, with radar operators somewhere below tracking her every movement. The landscape that had seemed empty minutes earlier now revealed its secrets. Solar panels glinted between rocks, camouflaged to look like natural formations. Vehicle tracks scarred the desert floor in patterns that spoke of recent, organized activity. And there, a flash of reflected sunlight from something that shouldn't exist in this sector. Zara pulled her aircraft into a sharp climbing turn, using the F-35's thrust vectoring to change direction in ways that conventional aircraft couldn't match. The maneuver bought her precious seconds as the SAM operators below recalculated their firing solutions. Through her canopy, she caught sight of what had generated that reflection. A mobile radar array, truck-mounted and sophisticated, its dish rotating with mechanical precision. The second radar lock came from a different direction entirely. Multiple SAM sites, coordinated, creating overlapping fields of fire that turned the sky into a lethal maze. Whoever had established this installation understood modern air defense doctrine better than intelligence had suggested possible. Mayday, Mayday, any station. This is Phantom, Grid November 7-4 Alpha. I am taking effective fire from multiple SAM sites, requesting immediate support. Her emergency transmission cut through the jamming, but the responses that came back felt wrong, too coordinated, too familiar with her call sign, too aware of her specific aircraft capabilities, as if they'd been expecting her. The realization hit like a physical blow. This wasn't a reconnaissance mission that had gone wrong. This was a trap, carefully constructed and precisely baited. And she'd flown directly into it. The first missile launch signature bloomed on her threat display like a deadly flower. Heat plume ascending, acceleration curve indicating a modern Russian-made system with enough speed and maneuverability to challenge even the F-35's evasion capabilities. Zara rolled inverted and dove, pulling negative GS that pressed her against her harness while her aircraft's defensive systems calculated intercept probabilities and suggested escape vectors. The missile passed close enough for her to see its fins adjusting course, close enough for the proximity fuse to nearly trigger. Her aircraft shuddered from the near miss, warning lights cascading across her instrument panel like electronic waterfalls. Hydraulic pressure dropping in the secondary system. Electronic countermeasures overheating from continuous operation. Fuel consumption elevated from high-stress maneuvering. Control, Phantom. I need an immediate extraction vector. Aircraft systems are degraded and I'm taking effective fire. The response, when it came, carried Morrison's voice but felt filtered through electronic processing that made his words sound distant, artificial. Phantom, abort mission and return to base. Vector 270 for direct routing. Something in his tone triggered her survival instincts. The suggested vector would take her directly over two more grid squares that her mission briefing had marked as empty. If the intelligence was wrong here, if more SAM sites waited along that route, she'd never make it home. Instead, she turned north, following terrain features that would mask her radar signature while keeping her away from the obvious approach corridors. The F-35's terrain-following radar painted the landscape in precise detail, showing her gullies and ridgelines that could provide cover from ground-based tracking systems. Behind her, the desert installation continued its electronic harassment, jamming frequencies and broadcasting false navigation signals designed to confuse and disorient. But they'd made one mistake. In their eagerness to trap her, they'd revealed the sophistication of their operation. This wasn't some random terrorist cell with improvised weapons. This was a state-sponsored installation with equipment that shouldn't exist in this location, operated by personnel with training that suggested military backgrounds. The implications settled over her like a cold wind. Someone had known she would be here. Someone had prepared specifically for her aircraft, her capabilities, her probable responses to threat scenarios. Someone had sold her out. The fuel gauge dominated her attention now, its needle dropping toward levels that made return to base a matter of physics rather than choice. Each evasive maneuver consumed precious jet fuel, Each electronic countermeasure drew power from systems that couldn't be replaced in flight. The F-35 was an extraordinary aircraft, but it wasn't magic. It couldn't violate the laws of thermodynamics or create energy from nothing. Her secure radio finally crackled to life, Morrison's voice cutting through the interference. "Phantom, what's your status?" Multiple SAM sites, sophisticated jamming capability, organized ground presence in Sector 7. This isn't what intelligence briefed, Control. A pause that lasted exactly 7 seconds, long enough for her to know that Morrison was choosing his words carefully, possibly with others listening. "Copy, Phantom. Can you confirm enemy capabilities?" The question felt loaded with implications she couldn't decode from 30,000 feet. Zara checked her instrument panel, nodding the way certain classified sensors had been quietly recording data throughout the engagement. Information that would be downloaded and analyzed by specialists whose clearance levels exceeded her own. Control, recommend immediate satellite surveillance of grid November 7-4 Alpha through November 7-8 Charlie. This is a significant installation with capabilities that pose immediate threat to air operations in this sector. Roger, Phantom, RTB immediately. Debrief in Conference Room Alpha upon landing. Conference Room Alpha wasn't part of the standard post-mission protocol. It was where they conducted the conversations that generated no written records, where questions were asked that couldn't be answered in official channels. Zara had been in rooms like that before, though never on this side of the interrogation table. The flight home passed in relative silence, her aircraft's sensors continuing their methodical collection of electronic intelligence, while she navigated by landmarks that existed in no civilian atlas. The desert below held secrets older than any military installation. Ancient lake beds where test pilots had written their names in contrails, mountain ranges that had witnessed the birth of stealth technology, valleys where prototypes had crashed and burned in pursuit of capabilities that would reshape warfare itself. As the base appeared on the horizon, she caught sight of unusual activity on the runway. Additional aircraft, tail numbers she didn't recognize, personnel in uniforms that suggested intelligence agencies rather than standard Air Force operations. Her landing approach felt like descending into an ambush. The F-35 touched down with its characteristic whisper, thrust reversers and brake systems working in harmony to bring 30 tons of military technology to a controlled stop. As Zara taxied toward the designated hardstand, she noted the positioning of security personnel. Too many, too well-positioned, too ready for something to go wrong. Ground crews surrounded her aircraft before the engine spooled down, connecting power cables and data links with efficiency that suggested prior coordination. Through her canopy, she could see Morrison approaching with 2 men in civilian clothes whose bearings screamed federal agents. Behind them, Captain Reeves carried what looked like evidence bags and recording equipment. The cockpit ladder locked into position with a metallic clang that seemed to echo across the entire base. As Zara climbed down, she felt the weight of scrutiny from a dozen different directions: tower personnel with binoculars, maintenance crews who should have been working on other aircraft, security guards whose positions formed a loose perimeter around her hardstand. "Commander Camel," Morrison said as her boots touched the tarmac, "these gentlemen need to speak with you about this morning's flight." The taller agent, whose ID identified him as Special Agent Blackwood from an agency whose acronym she didn't recognize, stepped forward with the measured cadence of someone accustomed to asking difficult questions. "Ma'am, we need to discuss what you observed during your reconnaissance mission. Specifically, we need to understand how you identified the installation's capabilities with such precision." The question hung in the desert air like heat shimmer, distorting everything around it. Behind the agent's professional courtesy lay assumptions about her background that she couldn't address without revealing information that officially didn't exist. Her service record showed air combat training, advanced electronics warfare school, tactical reconnaissance certification, all perfectly legitimate credentials that explained nothing about how she'd recognized the sophisticated jamming patterns, how she'd known to avoid the extraction vector that would have led her into additional SAM coverage. The trident pin pressed against her chest like a silent witness to experiences that had no official documentation, operations that existed only in the memories of personnel, with clearance levels that transcended normal military hierarchies. She met Blackwood's gaze with the steady composure that had carried her through interrogations in places that didn't appear on any map. I observed electronic signatures consistent with advanced surface-to-air missile systems, standard threat assessment protocols, Agent Blackwood. Conference Room Alpha felt like every classified briefing space she'd ever entered, windowless, soundproofed, equipped with electronic countermeasures that prevented surveillance from outside agencies. The table was government tissue metal, surrounded by chairs that had been designed for function rather than comfort. Morrison sat across from her, flanked by Blackwood and his partner, a woman whose ID read Agent Torres but whose bearing suggested military background. "Let's start with your service history," Torres said, opening a file that seemed thicker than Zara's official record should have been. "You graduated flight school third in your class, served 2 tours in Afghanistan flying close air support missions, transferred to test pilot training at Edwards Air Force Base." Zara nodded, recognizing the careful way Torres recited only the information that existed in accessible databases. The file in the agent's hands clearly contained additional material, pages with black ink redactions, photographs from missions that had never been publicly acknowledged, documentation of training that officially hadn't occurred. "What the official record doesn't explain," Blackwood interjected, "is how a test pilot acquired the tactical reconnaissance skills to identify a sophisticated enemy installation within minutes of entering contested airspace." The accusation implicit in his statement settled over the room like dust. Morrison shifted in his chair, his expression suggesting this conversation was proceeding along lines he hadn't anticipated. Outside, the sound of jet engines provided a distant counterpoint to the tension building within these walls. "My training included electronic warfare familiarization," Zara replied, keeping her voice level. "Standard curriculum for pilots assigned to stealth aircraft operations." "Standard curriculum," Torres repeated, making notes on a legal pad. "Would that curriculum include identification of specific Russian jamming protocols, knowledge of SAM site positioning doctrine, familiarity with coordinated air defense networks?" Each question landed with surgical precision, designed to probe the gaps between her official training and her demonstrated capabilities. Zara recognized the technique, interrogation methods that used known facts to illuminate hidden truths, pressure applied with professional courtesy until the subject revealed information they hadn't intended to share. Morrison cleared his throat, drawing attention with the authority his rank commanded. "Agent Torres, Commander Camel's background isn't the primary concern here. What matters is the intelligence she gathered about the installation in Sector 7. The deflection felt protective, though whether Morrison was protecting her or the classification levels of his own operation remained unclear. In her peripheral vision, she caught sight of him making a subtle hand gesture, 3 fingers extended briefly, then withdrawn. He knew, somehow Morrison had connected the pieces. The desert installation had been operational for exactly 17 days, according to satellite imagery that Agent Torres spread across the conference table like a timeline of evolving threat capability. The photographs showed the progression from empty landscape to sophisticated military complex, each image time-stamped and annotated with intelligence assessments that grew increasingly concerned as the installation's true purpose became apparent. Phase 1, Torres indicated the first photograph, shows initial site preparation. Standard excavation equipment, civilian contractors, nothing that raised immediate flags. The image looked innocuous enough. Bulldozers and dump trucks arranged around what could have been any construction project in the American Southwest. Zara studied the details, noting equipment positioning and vehicle types with the analytical eye that had been honed through countless similar briefings in facilities that officially didn't exist. Phase 2, Torres continued, defensive positions begin to emerge. Note the geometric patterns here and here, classic surface-to-air missile placement, optimized for overlapping coverage. The second photograph revealed the transformation. What had been random construction activity now showed purposeful military engineering. SAM sites positioned with mathematical precision, command bunkers built to resist aerial bombardment, communication arrays designed for secure, long-range coordination. Morrison leaned forward, studying the images with the intensity of someone seeing them for the first time. How did this level of activity escape our surveillance protocols? The question carried implications that made the room feel smaller, more charged with potential conflict. Blackwood and Torres exchanged glances that spoke of interagency tensions and jurisdictional disputes that existed beyond the scope of this briefing. The installation utilized advanced camouflage techniques, Blackwood explained, his tone suggesting frustration with operational security that had exceeded expectations. Electronic emissions were minimized during construction. Visual camouflage was sophisticated enough to fool automated analysis systems. Zara examined the photographs more closely, recognizing patterns that civilian intelligence analysts might miss. The SAM site positioning followed doctrine she'd studied in training that wasn't supposed to exist, implemented by personnel whose expertise suggested background beyond typical terrorist organization capabilities. Who built this? She asked, though she suspected the answer would raise more questions than it resolved. Torres closed the file with a gesture that seemed final. That's what we're trying to determine, Commander. Your reconnaissance flight was designed to gather electronic intelligence that might identify the installation's sponsors. The admission hung in the air like a confession. Zara had been sent into hostile airspace not for routine surveillance, but as a deliberate probe, her aircraft's sensors designed to provoke responses that would reveal the enemy's true capabilities. She'd been bait. The electronic warfare data from her flight filled 3 separate hard drives, each containing signal intercepts that would require weeks of analysis by specialists whose security clearances granted access to classified comparison databases. Agent Torres handled the drives with the careful precision of someone dealing with evidence that might reshape geopolitical assessments. The jamming patterns you encountered, Blackwood said, consulting notes that seemed to contain more information than should have been possible, match signatures we've previously associated with specific state actors. However, the implementation here shows modifications that suggest technology transfer beyond normal intelligence estimates. Zara listened to the technical discussion while watching Morrison's reactions. The general's expression remained professionally neutral, but his hands told a different story, fingers drumming against the table in patterns that seemed unconscious but spoke of stress levels elevated beyond normal briefing parameters. Commander, Torres addressed her directly, during your evasion sequence, you avoided the suggested extraction vector. What prompted that decision? The question felt like crossing a minefield. Answering honestly would require explaining situational awareness that came from experiences officially documented nowhere. Deflecting would confirm suspicions that were already forming in the agent's assessments. The suggested vector felt tactically unsound given the threat environment, she replied, choosing words that were true without being complete. Standard evasion doctrine recommends unpredictable routing when under active radar engagement. Torres made additional notes, her pen moving with the steady rhythm of someone building a case from accumulated details. Your tactical assessment proved correct. Post-mission analysis indicates 2 additional SAM sites along the suggested extraction route. The revelation should have felt like validation, but instead it confirmed Zara's growing suspicion that this entire operation had been designed as an intelligence-gathering exercise with multiple objectives. Her mission had provided cover for testing enemy responses, mapping installation capabilities, and possibly evaluating her own performance under circumstances that might reveal aspects of her background that remained classified. Morrison stood, signaling the briefing's conclusion with military efficiency. "Commander Camel, you're restricted to base pending completion of the intelligence analysis. Agent Torres will coordinate additional debriefing sessions as needed." The restriction felt like house arrest dressed in operational necessity. As she left Conference Room Alpha, Zara caught Morrison's eye and saw something that might have been apology or warning or both. The base's evening routine continued around her like theater performed for an audience that wasn't paying attention. Personnel moved between buildings with purposeful efficiency. Aircraft maintenance proceeded according to schedules that prioritized readiness over convenience, and the desert beyond the perimeter fence stretched toward horizons that held secrets in every shadow. Zara's quarters felt smaller than usual, despite containing the same regulation furniture and personal effects that had defined her living space for the past 18 months. The walls seemed to press closer as she reviewed the day's events, searching for patterns that might explain why her routine reconnaissance mission had become the center of multi-agency scrutiny. Her laptop displayed email messages that felt routine until examined closely, training schedules that had been modified without explanation, duty assignments that rooted her away from personnel she'd worked with previously, small administrative changes that, viewed individually, meant nothing, but together suggested someone had been carefully managing her activities. The knock on her door came at exactly 2100 hours, too precise to be casual, too late to be official business. Through the security peephole, she saw Morrison standing alone in the corridor, his expression carrying the weight of decisions that couldn't be made in public forums. "General," she said, opening the door with the crisp formality that their ranks demanded. "We need to talk, Commander. Not here, somewhere we can speak freely." The invitation felt like stepping across a threshold that couldn't be uncrossed. Morrison's suggestion of privacy implied conversations that existed outside normal command channels, discussions that might require explanations she wasn't prepared to provide. "Sir, if this concerns the morning's mission, I've provided complete debriefing to the investigating agents." Morrison's smile held no humor. "Commander, what happened this morning has implications that extend beyond aircraft reconnaissance. We need to discuss your actual qualifications for the assignment you've been given." The emphasis on "actual" carried weight that made the corridor feel like it was narrowing around them. In the distance, the night shift's activities provided a backdrop of normalcy that felt increasingly distant from the reality of her situation. "10 minutes," Morrison said. "Building 7, room 204, come alone." Building 7 existed in the administrative section of the base, housing offices for personnel actions and supply coordination, exactly the kind of mundane location where sensitive conversations could occur without attracting attention. Room 204 was listed as storage space in the base directory, though Zara suspected its actual purpose involved activities that generated no official documentation. The walk across the base felt like traversing a stage where everyone knew their roles except her. Security guards offered regulation greetings that felt slightly too crisp. Maintenance personnel moved through their tasks with attention that seemed focused beyond their immediate responsibilities. Even the ambient sounds felt orchestrated: aircraft engines, generator hums, radio chatter combining into a symphony of operational activity that masked other conversations, other purposes. Room 204's door was unmarked, its lock requiring a key card that Morrison produced from an inner pocket. The space beyond felt like every classified briefing room she'd ever entered, electronic countermeasures humming softly, furniture that could be quickly reconfigured, communications equipment that bypassed normal base systems. Morrison activated privacy measures with practiced efficiency, switches and controls that isolated the room from external surveillance. When he turned to face her, his expression had shifted from commanding officer to something more complex, part confessor, part co-conspirator. 23 years ago, he began, a Navy pilot named Lieutenant Commander Zara Camel volunteered for a training program that officially never existed. The program was designed to develop deep cover operatives who could function in hostile territory while maintaining their military identities. The words fell into the soundproofed room like stones into still water, creating ripples that disturbed everything around them. Zara kept her expression neutral, though her heart rate elevated in ways that reminded her of target acquisition scenarios. The program was discontinued after 18 months, Morrison continued, following operational parameters that exceeded acceptable risk levels. All participants were reassigned to conventional duties with their specialized training classified at levels that precluded discussion even among cleared personnel. Sir, I'm not sure what you're suggesting. Morrison opened a file folder that contained photographs she'd never seen before, images of herself from training exercises that had taken place in locations she'd been ordered to forget, alongside personnel whose faces brought back memories of capabilities that had no official documentation. His next words changed everything. Commander, yesterday we received intelligence that the Sector 7 installation was specifically designed to test the capabilities of pilots with your particular background. Someone knows about the program. Someone knows about you. The revelation hit her like decompression sickness, a sudden realization that the mission had been personal from the beginning. Not reconnaissance, not intelligence gathering, but a probe designed to confirm suspicions about her identity and capabilities. Who else knows? She asked, though she feared the answer would complicate everything further. Morrison's expression darkened. That's what we need to find out, because whoever built that installation has access to information that should exist nowhere outside a very small circle of people who have been dead for over a decade. The weight of that statement settled over the room like a shroud, carrying implications that reached beyond individual careers into realms where national security intersected with personal survival. Outside, the base continued its nightly routine, unaware that in room 204, two military officers were confronting the possibility that secrets they'd thought buried had somehow found their way into enemy hands. The classified training program had operated under the designation Deep Current, a name that appeared in no official documentation, but existed in the memories of 17 personnel who'd undergone conditioning that pushed the boundaries of human capability. Morrison's file contained their names, current assignments, and a red-tagged notation that made Zara's blood run cold. 3 of the original participants had died in aircraft accidents over the past 6 months. Accidents, she repeated, studying the incident reports that described mechanical failures, pilot errors, and unfortunate coincidences that had removed highly trained operators from active duty permanently. Morrison nodded grimly. Captain Rodriguez lost over the Pacific during a routine training flight. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison crashed during weapons testing at China Lake. Major Kim, ejection seat malfunction during air combat maneuvering exercises. Each incident had been investigated thoroughly, according to the documentation, with findings that attributed the crashes to equipment failure or human error. But the timing pattern, the specific targeting of deep current veterans, suggested coordination that transcended random misfortune. Someone's eliminating witnesses, Zara said, voicing the conclusion that Morrison had obviously reached before calling this meeting. "Or testing capabilities," he replied. "The Sector 7 installation might have been designed to assess whether deep current training creates behavioral patterns that remain detectable years after completion." The possibility transformed her morning's mission from reconnaissance to psychological evaluation, her aircraft's sensors secondary to observations of her tactical decision-making under stress. Every choice she'd made, the evasion patterns, the route modifications, the threat assessments, had potentially revealed aspects of her background that were supposed to remain buried. "Sir, what's the current status of the installation?" Morrison activated a wall display that showed real-time satellite imagery of Sector 7. Where sophisticated missile systems had threatened her aircraft hours earlier, empty desert now stretched toward distant mountain ranges. The installation had vanished as completely as if it had never existed, leaving only faint scarring in the sand to suggest recent human activity. "Complete evacuation occurred within 3 hours of your flyover," Morrison explained. "Electronic emissions ceased, vehicles departed using routes that avoided satellite coverage, personnel extracted through corridors that suggest extensive operational planning." The thoroughness of the disappearance confirmed professional capabilities that exceeded typical terrorist organization resources. This had been a state-sponsored operation, conducted by personnel whose training included contingency planning for rapid withdrawal under pressure. "General, what aren't you telling me?" Morrison's pause lasted exactly 5 seconds, long enough to suggest internal debate about classification levels and need-to-know restrictions. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of decisions that would reshape her understanding of everything that had led to this moment. "Commander, the deep current program wasn't terminated because of excessive risk parameters. It was terminated because someone inside the program was selling information to foreign intelligence services." The accusation hung between them like a landmine waiting for pressure that would detonate everything around it. Morrison's file contained additional documentation, surveillance photographs, communication intercepts, financial records that painted a picture of betrayal from within the most classified levels of military special operations. "We never identified the source," Morrison continued. "The investigation was closed without resolution when the program ended, but someone with access to deep current training protocols has been providing information to hostile forces. The Sector 7 installation proves they're still active." Zara felt the walls of room 204 closing around her like the cockpit of an aircraft in an unrecoverable spin. Every aspect of her career, every assignment, every evaluation had been viewed through the lens of suspicion that she might be the source Morrison's investigation had never identified. "Sir, are you suggesting that I'm suggesting that someone wants us to think you are," Morrison interrupted. "Today's mission was designed to test that theory, to see if you would lead us to additional intelligence assets or reveal operational methods that confirm deep current training." The trap had been more sophisticated than she'd realized. Not just the SAM sites and electronic warfare, but a psychological operation designed to pressure her into revealing information that would either confirm or eliminate her as a suspect in a 20-year-old investigation. Morrison closed the file with a gesture that felt final. "Commander, you're officially on administrative leave pending completion of the counterintelligence review. Unofficially, we need your help to identify who's really selling our secrets." The counterintelligence review began at 600 hours with polygraph examinations that felt like surgical procedures performed without anesthesia. Agent Torres administered the tests with clinical precision, her questions designed to probe memories that officially didn't exist while avoiding topics that might trigger classification-level violations. "Have you ever provided classified information to unauthorized personnel?" "No." The polygraph's needle tracked across rolling paper, recording physiological responses that would be analyzed by specialists whose conclusions might determine whether she faced court-martial or clearance for continued service. Have you ever been contacted by foreign intelligence operatives? Not to my knowledge. The qualification felt necessary, given that effective intelligence recruitment often occurred without the target's awareness. Social contacts who asked casual questions, romantic relationships that developed too quickly, professional opportunities that provided access to sensitive information. The methods were sophisticated enough that detection required training most military personnel never received. During deep current operations, did you observe behavior by fellow participants that suggested compromise by hostile forces? The question probed territory that felt genuinely dangerous. Deep Current had been a close-knit community, personnel who'd shared experiences that created bonds beyond normal military camaraderie. Accusations among that group carried personal weight that transcended professional obligations. All personnel appeared to maintain appropriate operational security during my participation. Torres made notes that seemed to contain more information than her simple answers should have generated. The polygraph examination continued for 2 hours, covering aspects of her career that spanned from flight school through her current assignment, probing for inconsistencies that might indicate deception or concealment. When the session concluded, Torres packed her equipment with efficiency that suggested this was only the beginning of a process that would examine every aspect of Zara's military service. Commander, you'll remain available for additional sessions as needed. Agent Blackwood will coordinate with General Morrison regarding your duty status. The dismissal felt temporary, like intermission in a performance that would resume when the next act was ready. Zara left the examination room aware that her polygraph responses would be compared against baseline measurements from other deep current veterans, analyzed for patterns that might reveal deception or confirm innocence. In the corridor outside, she encountered Captain Reeves carrying what appeared to be her flight records, every mission, every evaluation, every training completion certificate from her entire career. The review was expanding beyond the immediate counterintelligence concerns into comprehensive background investigation. Someone was asking questions that reached into every corner of her professional life. Dr. Sarah Chen arrived on base aboard a civilian aircraft that landed without fanfare on a runway typically reserved for military operations. Her credentials identified her as a consultant specializing in psychological assessment of personnel with classified backgrounds, though her bearing suggested familiarity with environments where academic credentials intersected with operational security requirements. Morrison's